Hello everyone and welcome back to Science News Now. Today we are talking about climate change and how you can be a steward of the earth. This is a very important topic. I'm sure you guys have heard a little bit about it before. To start us off, we have Miss Dianna, and she has a really cool article that she's going to share with us. So let's go to see Miss Dianna.
Hello, Dianna. Are you here with us today?
Oh, hi, Marisa.
How's it going?
Well, it's okay. Just sitting here reading one of my favorite books.
Yeah, what do you got there?
It's called The Climate Emergency Atlas.
All right.
Yeah. So it talks about what's happening in the world and then what we can do. And my favorite part, look at all these beautiful pictures it's got in here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really bright and fun, and it's got lots of really great information.
That's awesome. And you did you check that out here at the library?
I did.
Very cool. I'm going to have to check it out. That looks really interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a really neat book, and it's got a lot of really up-to-date information in it. So it's a lot of fun. I like it a lot. It's probably one of my new favorite books.
That's very cool. I'll definitely have to check it out. So what brought you to this book today?
Well, so I found this really, really interesting article about undersea earthquakes and how the sound waves traveling from those earthquakes are telling us how much our oceans are warming up.
What?
Right? It was so interesting. So apparently scientists, because they've been trying to track and see how much our temperatures are warming up. And so like from space, they have satellites that take a look at the water surface temperatures, which is great because it tells us how hot the surface is. But I mean, the ocean is miles and miles deep. And so they wanted to know what was going on below the surface. And so then they had these other things that kind of bobbed along, and they could read about a mile down into the ocean. And they thought, okay, well, that's nice, but we want to go like all the way down and see what's happening. And they realized that the temperature of the water determines how quickly sound waves travel through water. And so they thought, well, we'll just put some artificial noise down there. But because they're thoughtful scientists, they don't want to disturb the sea life that's there.
Right.
So they thought, okay, well, we've got to figure out a way that we can track sound waves. And then somebody had the bright idea that earthquakes make noise.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, I kind of knew that. So the science kind of behind tracking the sound waves is really interesting to me, because sound doesn't travel at a constant speed.
Right.
So, I think light, more like it's really hard to slow down light, but sound can be slowed down and quickened based on like what it's traveling through. So if it's traveling through a solid, a liquid, or a gas, and it does depend on temperature as well. So that's such a unique way to measure something that's happening in our world that we wouldn't be able to really do otherwise. It's just a really unique way of approaching a problem.
Yeah. And so scientists have realized that earthquakes, because of fault lines, typically happen in the same place all the time. And we have all of this data from all of these earthquakes that have happened over time. And so they've been able to already look at least at 10 years and see that in the last 10 years, the ocean temperatures have raised 0.04 degrees.
Okay.
Just in 10 years, which doesn't sound like a lot. But when you think about how big our oceans are and how deep our oceans are, that's actually kind of a staggering number, because that's a lot of space that is rising in 0.04 degrees. And that's just in 10 years. So now they're going to go back and look at all of the history of earthquakes and see if they can figure out if there's any patterns or if it's gone up even more in the past.
That's fascinating. Yeah, like you said, I think that the oceans are so big and it takes a lot to affect them. And it's pretty well documented that humans do have such an impact on the world that even what seems like such a small change for us, that's a really big change for for the ocean because it is so big and it happened in such a short time frame. Like 10 years in perspective of like how long the planet has been, doing its thing.
Right.
That's a really fast time for something. That's like a second for the Earth.
Exactly.
It's 10 years for us, but it's a second for the Earth.
Exactly.
To already start kind of be like, oh, I'm a little warm. Like, I need to shed some layers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, as humans too, like we all think like, okay, we know about climate change. We know that things are happening, but I think as humans, unless we see it or experience it with our own eyes too, it's kind of hard to put into perspective exactly what's going on. So to hear that, yeah, like you said, in what's a blink of an eye for our Earth, it's gone up 0.04 degrees. It's like, oh wow, that's kind of a lot actually. Like, it's interesting. I mean, we live in a landlocked state, so the ocean to me it's a concept.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think that, so what's super interesting for me to think about in terms of humans and our relationship with the Earth and climate in general, is humans are just really, really good at adapting their environment to suit their needs, right? So we're kind of like really, really hyper evolved beavers. Or we do similar things like a beaver, right? So beavers, they cut down trees and they build their homes and they dam up like streams, right? To create an ecosystem that is ideal for them to live in. And that is exactly something that we do, right? When we build buildings and homes, we are creating an environment for us to live in, because humans we have a very narrow, like what we can live in, what we think is comfortable, even like here in Arizona, right? It gets really hot. Yeah. You don't want to be outside in 100+ degree weather, like even for very long, like you can't live in that.
Yeah.
And so we have built these buildings to help kind of make it safe for us to live. But we also need to consider, how we're building these buildings, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's really important, because here in the desert is different than, where I came from in the Midwest, where it's really, really cold up north and we have a lot of water around. So you have to take all of these things into consideration.
Absolutely. So I have a really interesting way that you can see climate change here in Arizona. Do you want to know what it is?
I definitely want to know.
So I've lived here my whole life. And when I was a kid, in the summer, we had really, really bad monsoon seasons. So we got tons of rain and there were storms all the time, which was fantastic because that was our hottest part of the year. So there was a lot of fires. So we had a lot of rain and it helped. Well, as our climate has progressively gotten hotter and hotter and hotter here in Arizona, we don't typically have a lot of monsoon storms now because the clouds burn off before they get into the valley. But we do have a lot of monsoon storms in the winter. And in the winter, when all of that rain comes, because it's nice and now it's raining, all of our mountains turn this beautiful color green because of grasses. But it makes our fire season worse because now we have dried grass in the summer opposed to like it was before. So it's a really interesting way to look at climate change in Arizona.
Yeah, it's super fascinating to see this impact that we have. And like, I think the grasses we've talked about are not native to Arizona either, right?
Right.
So that's something else to consider there. It's just we're changing our ecosystem in ways that we can't even really anticipate a lot of the times.
Exactly.
So it's hard, and especially like when we're thinking about things like that, it's hard to think of ways to, contribute to living with the environment versus just in the environment.
Right.
And I think there are ways to do it though. Like for instance, so in Phoenix and in other large cities, if you think of the streets, right? They're black, it's asphalt, it soaks up a lot of sun.
Yeah.
And it's what a really interesting thing that happens is what's called the urban heat island effect.
Yes.
So you're familiar with this. So it soaks up all of the sun during the day, right? And it kind of just hangs out. And then when the sun goes down, this heat is slowly released into the city, and it keeps it really, really hot, which is one of the reasons why if you're in Phoenix, like it stays hot for a very long time.
Yeah.
But there are ways, there's some things we can do to brainstorm. I know I was in an urban ecology class a while ago, and they talked about, like, what if we paint the streets white?
Yes.
And that's going to make them more reflective. They won't have the sun beating on them as long as they won't soak up the sun rays, and then it won't release quite as much heat. But there are ways that we can try to figure out to work with the environment.
So I've actually heard of places doing that. I know in California they started painting some of the roads white to try to see if it worked. And exciting, because Phoenix has really become an urban heat island. Places in Arizona, specifically Phoenix and Tempe, have decided to also try this approach. So yeah,
that's exciting.
Yeah, because when I was a kid in the summertime, it still got cool enough that, like, we could go outside and ride our bikes. I mean, it wasn't like 70 degrees, but it wasn't 110 either.
Yeah, for sure. And you just got to think of these new things and ways to adapt. And, moving forward, like the US, a lot of our buildings and things are modeled on, European buildings, but their climate's very different than our climate here. So we have to consider different ways that we could build things that are more suited to the desert.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think I just have one other thing that I thought was super interesting that I do want to share with you today. So this one isn't specifically related to, like, the earth and climate as it's changed, but a really, really cool story of humans and animals working together.
Okay.
So there is a group of people, and I believe they're in Africa, and they work with a bird called a honey guide.
It's not, the audio is not matching up with what you're saying.
Oh dear.
Okay, now I think it's caught up. There was a glitch for a second.
Okay.
All right, so let's just start with your article again.
Okay. All right. So there's an article I found that is about a group of people living in Africa, and they work with a bird called the honey guide.
Oh, okay.
And much like the name suggests, this bird likes to eat honey, and it does work with other animals, so including humans, to actually guide them to beehives.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's super cool. Because this little bird is really little, and if it were to get stung by one or two bees, that would be a big deal for it, right? So it works with, I think badgers were one of the ones that it works with in kind of the natural world. And then what has happened over time is humans have started to go out, and if they sing this, like, specific whistle, sometimes a honey guide will come, and it's a wild bird. They haven't been raised by humans. They haven't been trained by humans. They'll show up and they'll guide these people to the honey. And I think it's really cool. And they've also had a couple of things happen. This similar thing happens with dolphins and fishermen, the Irrawaddy dolphins, and they will guide fishermen to these great places to fish. So I think that there's a lot of really cool, good stories of, people and animals and the environment working together. And it's not all doom and gloom.
Right. There are some good things happening out there. And I like that nature is kind of learning to evolve around us a little bit too, and adapting to that. So that gives me hope.
Yeah. And it gives me hope to hear that Phoenix is going to be trying some techniques to lessen our urban heat island, because I would like to go outside in the evening during the summer and just kind of relax. It's not really a possibility right now.
Yeah, I do miss those days.
Well, thank you so much, Dianna, for sharing your article with us today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Yep, I'm going to go look for more science.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dianna, for sharing your article about how we can measure how the Earth heats up and the water heats up with sound waves. That is a super cool and interesting way to use science that I have never heard before. I think there's a lot of different ways you can use science and think about the ways it will impact other things. Like the scientists were going to put in an actual sound creating device in the ocean, but they thought a little bit ahead and were like, oh, you know what, this is going to impact the sea life already, and we don't want to do that. We're already impacting them a little bit with how we are kind of warming up the planet, right? So that was really cool to learn about. Next up, we have our teen correspondent, Hannah. She's going to be talking to us a little bit about your carbon footprint. So your carbon footprint is an interesting thing. You can contribute to it by, just walking and eating and driving around. So it's important to track it and see how we can kind of reduce it, because that will help reduce our impact on the earth. So take it away, Hannah.
Hello, welcome to Science News Now. I am Hannah, your host for today's segment, and the question we're going to be discussing for today is, how big is your footprint? Did you know you can make a footprint without using your feet? That's right. Every day you contribute to a carbon footprint, which measures your impact on the earth. A carbon footprint measures the amount of carbon dioxide gas you produce every day. Everything, including the electricity you use to the food you eat, determines the size of your footprint. So for today's project, we're going to be discussing our own carbon footprints with this worksheet I have right here. So what you're going to do is you're going to read the questions and fill out which options apply to you, and then tally up the numbers and calculate it at the end. The total number is going to be your carbon footprint and the number of pounds of carbon dioxide that you produce each year. The lower the number, the lower the number of greenhouse gases are emitted into the atmosphere. Alright, once you get your total, try to think of your choices in the survey. What changes can you make to reduce your carbon footprint? Try to think of things like the things that you can turn off, how you can get to school, how much you can eat, how much you will use electronics, how much you will recycle, and other things. Alright, thank you for watching Science News Now. I am Hannah. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing with us. There's a really interesting thing about how one of the most interesting things I think is for food is you don't really think about it. Like beef actually produces a lot of greenhouse gases. So they produce methane. So the more that we farm beef and cows, the bigger the impact it has on the earth. So there's other ways you can kind of lessen your impact if you eat less red meat, if you try to think of other ways outside the box that you can reduce it. Next up, we're going to have Miss Holly. She's going to be talking about tiny houses and reclaimed wood. So the reclaimed wood is pretty interesting. I hadn't heard much about it before. And tiny houses, when I first thought about tiny houses, I think of little fairy houses. So let's see what Miss Holly has to say.
Hello, Miss Holly. How are you doing today?
Hi, Marisa. How are you? I'm good. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm really excited. You have some fun topics to share with us today, right?
Yeah, I do. So we're going to talk about some reclaimed wood and tiny houses. So to give you an idea about what we're going to talk about, we're going to start off with some facts about trees and forests.
Okay.
Then we're going to talk about reclaimed wood and its benefits. What are tiny houses? The pros and cons of reclaimed wood. And trust me, this is actually very interesting. And then we're going to finally look at some pictures of tiny houses. So that's
perfect.
Kind of schedule here. So to start off with, I wanted to kind of ask you just to see if you might have an idea, not to put you on the spot, but what percentage of the world's land area do forests cover? What do you think?
Oh, okay. That's a good question, because I know the highest percentage is like water and oceans. And I want to say that's like 70% to 80% of the world is water, I think. Can't remember. But forest, I would say it's got to be pretty high. So, oh gosh, I don't even know. So and it's just land, right? Not like the whole world?
Yeah, area. So of the land, what do you think forests cover?
I'm going to say like 40%.
You are really close. It's actually 30%. but you're
Okay.
so over 30%. Another fact about trees and land is that between this, I thought this was really interesting. Between 1990 and 2016, the world lost 502,000 square miles of forest,
Wow.
and
That's a lot.
and it's actually an area larger than South Africa.
Whoa.
So when you
Okay.
think in terms of land, that's a lot of forest that we've lost in just 1990 to 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And since I'll go to a different fact actually, the percentage of the Amazonian rainforest that has been destroyed over the past 50 years, 17%. So over the past 50 years alone, 17% of the Amazonian rainforest has been destroyed. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and that's really significant because we rely on trees and forests, right, to recapture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is one of the greenhouse gases.
Right, and we're going to talk about that later too. The last fact I have is that since humans started cutting down trees, 46% of the world's trees have been felled. So 46% of the world's trees have been cut by humans.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a lot. And that kind of goes into, so we're going to talk about reclaimed wood because we don't want to keep cutting down trees, and we're losing so many of our trees, as you heard. And the places you can get reclaimed wood, which a lot of this reclaimed wood is used for tiny houses. You get them from construction projects, and that could be from a manufacturing project, or it could be just a construction project in, let's say that maybe a neighbor is doing. You could reclaim it that way with their permission, of course. Habitat for Humanity is another place you can get reclaimed wood, salvage yards, and often construction projects will let you haul away, like if you ask them, they want to get rid of that excess and they'll let you haul that away for free. So that's part of what makes tiny houses much more affordable. Also, go ahead.
So, and when you're talking about reclaimed wood, you mean like things like desks and chairs that used to be something else that we're going to be using for another purpose, or what does reclaimed wood mean?
Reclaimed wood, it could be like that, like things you could get from bulk trash or from your own house. Or reclaimed wood could also be just pieces of wood. So if it's like from a construction site and there's all different kind of pieces of wood, or from salvage yard, it could be a desk or wooden chairs, or it could be just like here's a piece and there's a piece. So it's a little more time consuming to get, but it's also much more affordable. And reclaimed wood, the benefits of reclaimed wood, and we're talking about this because tiny houses use a lot of reclaimed wood. The benefits are that it keeps reclaimed wood offsets new wood. So what builders do is they keep growing trees that will grow really quickly, and then they cut them down. But with reclaimed wood, you're offsetting that use of new wood. They don't have to do that as much. It prevents wood from entering a landfill. So instead of being in a landfill, you're going to be using it to build something new and something useful. And those trees that are not cut down because we're saving them by using reclaimed wood, they can continue to produce oxygen and like you said, sequester carbon. In 40 years, a tree, this is a pretty significant fact, in 40 years, a tree can sequester 1 ton of carbon. So we're talking about one tree over years sequesters a whole ton of carbon.
That's incredible.
Each tree has a lot of value. So I found those facts really interesting too. Great benefits. Something else that's really interesting is that I didn't know, because I always learn new things doing this. Older wood is actually better than newer wood.
Really?
So, yes. So let's say it's 10 years old. It's more dense. So those trees that are 10 years old are more dense, and they will be sturdier and stronger, and they won't warp because they've already, whatever twists and turns that wood has taken from water and weather, like it's already done that. Whereas the new wood, like if you put new wood in a house, it's probably going to warp. So that's why, yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if that's just because of like moisture. Like if you think of a tree, you know, there's a lot of water that's moving through the cells of the wood cells. And then once they've been exposed to air, like the water has to go somewhere, and the plants use that for support, right? They use water to help keep their cells in order. So it's going to go somewhere, and it's going to get more compact, like you said, more dense.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So the older wood is more dense, where the newer wood, and the fiber structure is much different than the older wood. So that's why the newer wood is so much more dense. It makes it better wood. It is a little harder to work with. So the older, denser wood, you do need better tools in order to cut it. It's going to be harder to cut because it's sturdier wood. So that's a little bit of an offset, but it will, if you're trying to build a house, you want to get the best wood that you can get.
Right. Absolutely.
Let's see what else. So the newer wood, it has larger grains that are less tightly packed, and the old woods are more stable, less likely to warp. So that's a great thing to use in your tiny house. So now we're going to talk about tiny houses. Now that you know the reclaimed wood. So the average price of a house. So when people are going to buy a house, the average price, so the price that's not the highest price and not the lowest price, but somewhere in the middle of, you know, around, if you average everything together, the average price of a house is about $350,000. Okay. For a regular house. The average price of a tiny house is $20,000. So, yeah.
That's a lot smaller than an average house.
So you're getting a smaller house, but the money you're saving, because what they were talking about in the books is that a lot of people don't use all the room they have in their house anyway. So if you build a small, not even if it's not necessarily a tiny house, but the smaller you build your house, the less it's going to cost. And what the builders do is they build these great big houses, and then they sell them for as much money as possible. Whereas build a tiny house and you're not paying as much money, and $20,000 is a lot more doable for most people than a $353,000 house.
I think it's a lot more achievable. And I know, like, my little apartment is plenty big for just me, and it's small, but I don't have much problem filling it up at all. So I think the same could be said for tiny houses.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that. So now that I know you live in an apartment, we'll talk about that. It's also tiny houses, so people get them because of the cost, or they build them because of the cost. They get to kind of design them because it's material driven. So whatever materials they find, that's kind of how they design their tiny house. So they get to like make their own cool thing, and and you'll see in some of the pictures, some of it is really cool. It's also more environmentally friendly because they have less clutter, they have less things, they're not purchasing and they're using less materials, and a lot of those materials are reused, like reclaimed wood. Some of it might be like aluminum siding that they find at the salvage yard or something. But so it's a lot more environmentally friendly. So a tiny house has it can range anywhere from 100 square feet, which is really not very much. It's about 10 feet by 10 feet, up into like a family of 4 might live in a tiny house that's 1,000 square feet. So tiny houses aren't necessarily the very, very small that you think of, because 1,000 square feet is more like probably your apartment. It's probably
mine's about 700 square feet. So for a 4-person, it's almost as big as a 4-person house.
Yeah, for a tiny house.
For a tiny house, yeah.
So we talked about that, and here now there's some pros and cons I want to go over with you. So there was a few that I mentioned already. They had a great table in this book that I got from the library, of course, and we'll take a picture. So pros can be less expensive, but then again, it takes more time. So it's more time intensive rather than money. Visual character and uniqueness. So you get to kind of make your own really cool thing, as compared to a con of that would be like non-standard sizes of wood. Because when you go to the salvage yard, It's not like going to Home Depot where they cut everything exactly the size that you want it. We talked about the denser grain, and it requires more labor to use it. Let's see, something we haven't talked about. Oh, so in tiny houses, people often get not just the wood, but they get like fixtures, light fixtures. They get knobs and little handles, and they might get a crate that would make a really cool drawer, and it might have like writing on it. So in tiny houses, a lot of the items have a story that goes along with them. They might belong to an old hotel, a historic hotel, or they might have, you know, some kind of story about, oh, you know, this is how we found that item, or this belonged to my grandmother's house, and now we're reusing this in our house. So it makes it really unique. It's when we go through a new house, like there's not a lot of stories there. You know, it's just we paid somebody and they built the house, or the house was already built and we bought it. But here in tiny house, you can really kind of go along with that story thing, which is fun to tell people about and fun to keep adding to your story. So that's kind of thing. So now we get to look at some of these tiny houses are really cool. And, you know, I would like at least vacation. So here's a picture. This is like one design.
Okay. It seems like there's a lot of space, even though it's tiny.
It does. And one of the things they talked about was that the space, they design it so there's more space than you think. Like they have is just the bed. The bed is up here. So they have they use a lot of lofts, and they maximize the space on the ceiling that we normally, we wouldn't really do anything with. Like they use that to actually sleep, and they use that to store things instead of like in a big house, we might just decorate it or even just leave it alone. So it maximizes the space. So you might have something like this, whereas it looks like a couch, but I'm thinking there's storage under there of things. Things. And let me get a different example, because this was a really fun book to look at, because they had so many different kinds of houses, and so everyone has like their own special design. So this was kind of cool. This is a tiny house on wheels.
Okay, so you can move it around whenever you want it. That's nice.
You can travel with it, take it on vacation, you know, especially that's pretty useful. And some of these spaces, like these are cool little, like here's a little reading nook, it looks like. Just cool place to hang out. So, they have a lot of different ones. I like this one is a railroad car.
Oh my gosh. So they went a step further than just doing reclaimed wood. They found a whole railroad car to repurpose.
I mean, you could think about it, you know, you could use a bus, you could use things like that, you know, and make it so they do have like trailers and things that you can drive the whole thing away, not just one piece of it. But like in here, like I was talking about those probably have a story that goes along with it, you know, from different places. So this was a really cool book. We have several books about tiny houses at the library. You know, I'd love to vacation there. And that looks really cozy. And the thing I was surprised about is they do look like they have a lot more space than I thought. Like it's like this one. This will be the last one I show you because we want you to check out the books. But like there's a lot of space there. Yeah,
for sure.
Do you kind of find that in your apartment? Are you buying less? And
yeah, I kind of keep things pretty simplified anyway, but I think that it's a good way to, you don't want to fill up the space that you have, and it's nice to have these open spaces, open plans, and reuse what you do have in new and inventive ways. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons people got into it, because they wanted to buy less, you know, and not hurt the environment as much. They want to think of creative ways to use the spaces. And one of the things they wanted to do, that one person in this book said, is they wanted to focus on the important things in life.
Right.
And when you think about important things in life, like shelter and food and your family, it's really not stuff. So being in the tiny house, some of them don't even have internet.
Right.
So some of them really are just focused on a very simple life that they have in their nice tiny house that they took a lot of time to build and put together. So I hope you enjoyed that about tiny houses.
I did. Thank you so much for sharing, Miss Holly, and I'm really excited to see what you share with us next time.
All right. Well, thank you, and I hope you have a good day, and maybe we can go home and think about how we can less clutter our own spaces and use the space a little better.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, have a great day.
Thank you so much, Miss Holly, for sharing those tiny houses and reclaimed wood facts. I think that it's really important. You know, we've all heard the phrase reduce, reuse, recycle, and tiny houses kind of embody all of those features. And kind of, I think it also ties into what Diana and I were talking about with, you know, cities and building houses that don't have as much of an impact on the earth. So when you have a tiny house, it's a lot cheaper than like a big old house to maintain in terms of like electricity and water, and it's also going to, you know, take up less space on the earth, and you can live a lifestyle that might be a little bit more conducive to helping lessen our impact on the earth. So thank you guys so much for tuning into Science News Now. We'll see you next time.